Right now, health investigators are tracing one of the largest food poisoning outbreaks in recent American history. Thousands of people sick across the Midwest, over 100 hospitalized, and headlines pointing at lettuce served by one of the biggest fast food chains in the country. The supplier under investigation hasn't been officially confirmed, and we'll be careful about that. But behind the health story hides a money story almost nobody covers: what one invisible microbe does to a billion-dollar supply chain. Because in the food business, a single bacterium can be more destructive than any competitor, any recession, any scandal. Today we're breaking down the economics of food recalls from the very beginning. How a contamination becomes a financial avalanche, the case where a peanut executive got what amounts to a life sentence, the outbreak that cut a beloved restaurant stock in half, the recall response, so brilliant they teach it in every business school on earth, and the ugly math of who actually pays when a food supply breaks. By the end, you'll never look at a recall headline or the salad aisle the same way again. It's worth remembering how young this entire system is. For most of American history, food was an unregulated free-for-all. Milk cut with chalk, candy colored with lead, meat processed in conditions that defy description. What changed everything was a novel, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, published in 1906, exposing Chicago's meatpacking horrors. The public exploded, and within months Congress passed the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act, the legislation that eventually grew into the modern FDA. The entire regulatory apparatus we're discussing today exists because one book made America look at its dinner plate. And for a chilling preview of how one microbe kills a company, consider the strange case of Bon Vivant. In 1971, this New Jersey soup maker, a 58-year-old business producing millions of cans a year, shipped a batch of vichyssoise soup containing botulism toxin. One man died. The company recalled everything, but the headlines were fatal. Within a month, Bon Vivant was in bankruptcy, and the brand was gone forever. A company that took half a century to build was erased by a single can. Even the word vichyssoise became commercially radioactive for a generation. That is the asymmetry of food. One failure can outweigh 50 years of success. First, the scale most people never see. Food recalls are not rare events. In the United States, they happen essentially every week, hundreds per year across meat, produce, packaged goods, and supplements, overseen by two referees: the FDA for most foods and the USDA for meat and poultry. Most recalls are small and quiet, a mislabeled allergen, a batch pulled from a few states, resolved in days. But every so often, one goes catastrophic. And the difference between a quiet recall and a company-ending disaster is one of the most expensive lines in all of business. Industry studies put the average direct cost of a single significant recall around $10 million. But direct cost is just the entry fee. The full bill stacks in layers, retrieving and destroying product across thousands of stores, notifying regulators, retailers, and the public, lab testing, and plant shutdowns. Then the lawyers arrive. Personal injury lawsuits, class actions, settlements that run into the tens or hundreds of millions when people die. Then lost contracts when supermarkets and restaurant chains quietly switch suppliers forever. And finally, the largest, slowest cost of all, the brand. Because here's the core financial truth of the food industry. A brand is a promise of safety compressed into a logo. Nobody reads lab reports before dinner. We outsource that trust to names on packages. That trust is an invisible asset worth billions, built over decades, and it converts to a liability overnight when the promise breaks. Studies of recall events show public food companies losing meaningful chunks of market value within days, and the damage lingers. Consumers avoid the brand for months or years, especially parents. In food, reputation isn't part of the business. It is the business. To see how deadly this gets, start with the outbreak that created the modern food safety era. Jack in the Box, 1993. Undercooked hamburgers contaminated with E. coli O157 sickened more than 700 people across 4 states. Most victims were children. 4 of them died. America was horrified. This strain was barely known to the public, and suddenly it was killing kids via fast food. The chain sales collapsed. Lawsuits exceeded $50 million, and the company teetered near bankruptcy as its name became synonymous with poison burgers. But the Jack-in-the-Box catastrophe bought something with all that suffering. It rewired the entire industry. The government declared E. coli an adulterant in ground beef, meaning its mere presence made meat illegal to sell. Cooking temperature standards were rewritten nationwide. And the company itself, fighting for survival, implemented one of the first comprehensive farm-to-fork safety programs in fast food, testing that later became industry standard. It survived, barely, and decades later it's still expanding. The lesson stuck. In food, safety spending isn't a cost center. It's existential insurance. Now for the opposite story, the one prosecutors still use as their favorite example, the Peanut Corporation of America. In 2008 and 2009, a salmonella outbreak traced to its Georgia plant killed 9 people and sickened more than 700 across nearly every state. The plant's conditions were grim, leaky roof, rodents, but that's not what made this case historic. What made it historic was the email trail. Because investigators discovered the company had tested its products, seen positive salmonella results, and shipped them anyway. One email from a CEO about delayed shipments read, simply, just ship it. The fallout was biblical. The recall cascaded into the largest in American food history at the time, nearly 4,000 products pulled, because peanut paste hides inside everything. Crackers, cookies, ice cream, energy bars, pet food. The peanut industry as a whole lost an estimated $1 billion as terrified consumers abandoned the entire category, punishing thousands of innocent farmers and brands for one company's crimes. Peanut Corporation itself filed for bankruptcy within months and simply ceased to exist. And then the government did something it had never really done before. It sent the executives to prison. In 2015, CEO Stuart Parnell was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. For a 70-something-year-old man, effectively a life sentence, the harshest punishment ever handed to an executive in a food safety case. His brother got 20 years, the quality manager 5. The message to every boardroom in the food business was unmistakable. Knowingly shipping contaminated product isn't a regulatory issue anymore. It's a crime that ends your company, your fortune, and your freedom. Cover-ups, in food, are the one strategy with a guaranteed negative return. Then there's the case every investor remembers, Chipotle, 2015. The burrito chain was Wall Street's darling, the fastest-growing restaurant story in America, built on a brand of fresh, wholesome, better-than-fast food ingredients. Then, in a matter of months, came a horror movie sequence of outbreaks. E. coli across multiple states, norovirus incidents, salmonella, hundreds of customers sickened. Nobody died, but the brand promise, fresh means safe, inverted overnight. Fresh suddenly meant risky. And the market's response was one of the most brutal repricings in restaurant history. Same-store sales collapsed by 30%. The stock lost roughly half its value from its peak, wiping out over $10 billion in market capitalization, for a company where no single meal could be definitively blamed for long. Recovery took years. Free burrito coupons by the millions, new safety protocols, a new CEO, and eventually, in 2020, a $25 million federal fine, the largest ever in a food safety case. Here's the investor lesson inside the pain. The market punishes premium brands hardest because their valuation is built on trust. The higher the halo, the harder the fall. And sometimes the product is beloved enough to survive what should be fatal. Blue Bell Creameries, the century-old Texas ice cream institution, discovered listeria in its products in 2015, linked to 3 deaths. The company did something almost unheard of. It recalled everything, shut down every production line in every plant, and disappeared from freezers entirely for months. It laid off or furloughed over a third of its workforce, took an emergency injection of hundreds of millions from a billionaire investor, and later paid over $17 million in criminal penalties. Texas, remarkably, forgave it. Most brands wouldn't be so lucky. If you want the most extreme modern lesson in supply concentration, look at baby formula 2022. Abbott Nutrition shut down a single plant in Sturgis, Michigan, after bacterial contamination concerns and infant deaths were investigated. One plant. And because just a few companies control almost the entire American formula market, with Abbott alone holding roughly 40%. That single closure detonated a full-blown national crisis. Empty shelves coast to coast, rationing at pharmacies, desperate parents driving hours, and the White House invoking the Defense Production Act and flying formula in on military aircraft. Operation Fly Formula. Warplanes hauling baby milk because one factory went down. The formula crisis exposed the hidden math of extreme concentration. Regulatory and contract structures had consolidated production so tightly that the system had no slack, no redundancy, no plan B. Abbott paid dearly, hundreds of millions in costs, a consent decree, congressional hearings, but the deeper bill landed on the entire country, in shortages and panic. Economists call this a single point of failure, and it's the recurring villain of this channel. The same efficiency that makes things cheap in normal times makes failures catastrophic in bad times. Cheap and fragile, it turns out, are often the same supply chain wearing different weather. And when trust breaks at national scale, it can take a decade to heal. In 2008, Chinese dairy producers were caught lacing milk and infant formula with melamine, an industrial chemical that fakes protein readings, sickening an estimated 300,000 babies. The scandal didn't just destroy companies. Executives were prosecuted, two were executed. It vaporized Chinese consumers' trust in their own domestic formula industry, so completely that for more than a decade, Chinese parents emptied supermarket shelves from Australia to Europe buying foreign formula. An entire international gray market born from one poisoning scandal. Trust, once broken at that scale, migrates across borders and stays there. Which brings us back to lettuce, because leafy greens are the food safety economist's nightmare, and there's a structural reason today's outbreak involves salad and not, say, canned soup. Fresh greens have no kill step, no cooking, no pasteurization, nothing between the field and your mouth that destroys pathogens. They're grown in open fields exposed to water runoff and wildlife, harvested and commingled, leaves from many farms shredded together in one plant, then shipped fast because shelf life is days. One contaminated field, blended into the supply, becomes a multi-state outbreak with terrifying efficiency. America learned this in 2018 in the Great Romaine crisis. After E. coli outbreaks traced to growing regions, the CDC did something unprecedented. It told the entire country, days before Thanksgiving, to throw away all romaine lettuce. All of it, every brand, every region, because traceability was too slow to pinpoint the source. Grocery stores emptied their shelves nationwide. Farmers with perfectly clean fields watched their harvests plowed under, collectively losing hundreds of millions. That's the cruelest economics of produce. When traceability fails, punishment becomes collective. The innocent pay alongside the guilty, because nobody can prove who's who fast enough. Here's a counterintuitive fact that should actually comfort you. Recalls are increasing partly because detection got superhuman. The CDC runs a system called PulseNet, a national database that DNA fingerprints bacteria from sick patients across the country. When 3 people in Ohio and 2 in Kentucky carry genetically identical E. coli, the system connects them into an outbreak within days, even if they've never met, even before anyone suspects a food. 20 years ago, those 5 cases were invisible statistical noise, and the contaminated product just kept selling. More recall headlines doesn't always mean dirtier food. Often it means better flashlights. The legal architecture changed too. For a century, nearly all American food recalls were technically voluntary. The FDA could plead but not command. That ended with the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011, which finally gave the FDA mandatory recall power and, more importantly, flipped the entire philosophy from reacting to outbreaks to preventing them, with required hazard plans and inspections. And looming over every executive is something older and scarier. The Park Doctrine, a Supreme Court precedent that lets prosecutors hold corporate officers personally, criminally liable for violations they should have prevented, even without proof they knew. In food, the corner office has no plausible deniability. Now look at the structure that turns one supplier's problem into a national event. Concentration. The modern food system is astonishingly consolidated. A handful of mega suppliers wash, chop, and bag the produce for thousands of restaurants and supermarkets across entire regions. One company can supply a fast food chain's every location in multiple states from a single processing hub. That scale is why your salad costs $3 instead of $8. Industrial efficiency is real. But it also means there's no such thing as a small contamination anymore. The supply chain is a megaphone. Whatever enters it gets amplified coast to coast. This is the same concentration lesson we've seen across every industry we cover on this channel, from banks to chip makers. Efficiency and fragility are twins. Consolidation squeezes out cost and quietly stacks all your eggs into fewer, bigger baskets. In finance, the too-big-to-fail bank. In food, the too-big-to-trace supplier. Regulators know it, which is why new traceability rules are forcing the industry toward digital record-keeping, batch-level tracking, some companies even experimenting with blockchain, so the next outbreak can be pinpointed in hours instead of weeks. Every day, shaved off an investigation saves millions and sometimes lives. So who actually pays when the system breaks? Follow the bill. The victims pay first in hospital costs, lost work, and sometimes lifelong complications. Their lawsuits claw some of it back. The implicated company pays in recalls, settlements, fines, and lost enterprise value. Innocent competitors pay through category collapse, when consumers flee everything that resembles the contaminated product. Insurers pay. Product recall insurance is a real market, though most firms are badly underinsured for the brand damage that policies can't cover. And taxpayers pay quietly, funding the CDC disease detectives and FDA inspectors who untangle every outbreak. Food poisoning litigation is so consistent that it built its own specialized industry. The most famous practitioner, a Seattle lawyer named Bill Marler, started with the Jack-in-the-Box children in 1993 and turned foodborne illness into a legal empire, extracting hundreds of millions in settlements over 3 decades and becoming so feared that his name alone changes corporate behavior. Executives openly admit designing safety programs to stay out of his inbox. Love or hate the plaintiff's bar, the economic function is real. When regulators are slow and margins are thin, the credible threat of a 9-figure lawsuit is the industry's most persuasive food safety inspector. One more structural difference worth understanding. Packaged goods versus restaurants. A packaged food brand can recall a batch, pull lot numbers, and quarantine the damage to specific products on specific shelves. A restaurant chain cannot recall anything. The product is the experience, cooked and eaten in minutes. So when an outbreak hits, the only thing to quarantine is the brand itself. That's why restaurant outbreaks are so much deadlier to shareholder value per victim. There's no lot number to blame, no batch to destroy. Every location wears the stain simultaneously. Chipotle couldn't recall burritos. It could only watch customers stop coming. And hovering over every outbreak is a courtroom chain reaction. The restaurant chain gets sued by customers, so the chain sues its supplier, who sues the farm, who sues the water district or the compost vendor, a cascade of litigation that takes years and reshapes contracts forever. After each major outbreak, the surviving buyers rewrite supplier agreements. More testing, more audits, more indemnification, more insurance requirements. This is how the system actually improves, not through virtue, but through liability. In food safety, the plaintiff's bar has arguably driven as much reform as the regulators. And the modern information environment has removed the industry's old cushion, time. In 1993, an outbreak spread at the speed of evening news broadcasts and next-day papers. Today, a single viral video of a moldy product or a hospital wristband can detonate across TikTok and X within hours, long before the CDC confirms anything, and the algorithmic amplification doesn't wait for lab results. Brands now lose the narrative in the first afternoon. The financial implication is brutal. Crisis response that used to have a week of runway now has until dinner time. Companies without a pre-built response playbook aren't slow anymore. They're dead on arrival. For you as a consumer, the practical playbook is short. Recalls.gov aggregates every active recall in one place. Worth a glance if your fridge is full of the week's headlines. Know the perennial high-risk categories: raw sprouts, undercooked ground meat, unpasteurized dairy and juice, raw shellfish, and yes, pre-cut leafy greens. Convenience and risk travel together, because every additional processing step adds hands and surfaces. And resist the category panic. When one brand of lettuce is implicated, the statistical risk from the others rarely changes. Punishing entire aisles for one company's failure feels safe, but mostly just bankrupts innocent farmers. Now, for the deepest question in this whole story. If contamination is so catastrophically expensive, why does it keep happening? The answer is an incentive problem as old as business itself. Food is a brutally thin-margin industry, often 2 to 4% net. Safety spending, testing, sanitation, slower lines, better equipment is invisible when it works. No customer ever praised a salad for the pathogens it didn't contain. So when budgets tighten, the invisible investment is the easiest to trim, and nothing bad happens, month after month, until the day something catastrophic does. It's the same math as skipping insurance. Free until it's ruinous. The companies that get this right treat safety spending the way engineers treat redundancy, as the cheapest disaster insurance money can buy. Run the numbers from the cases we've covered. A comprehensive testing program might cost a large processor a few million a year. The Peanut Corporation saved pennies per shipment and generated $1 billion in industry losses plus prison sentences. Chipotle's Outbreak cost over $10 billion in market value, thousands of times any plausible prevention budget. In food, prevention has perhaps the best return on investment in all of business. It just pays out in disasters that never make headlines. There's also a masterclass in what to do when prevention fails, and it comes from outside food. Tylenol, 1982. Someone laced capsules with cyanide in Chicago. 7 people died. Johnson & Johnson's product wasn't even at fault. It was sabotage, yet the company instantly recalled every bottle in America. 31 million of them, $100 million, unthinkable at the time. It halted advertising, cooperated loudly with authorities, and invented the tamper-evident packaging you've unwrapped 1,000 times since. Within a year, the brand had recovered its market. It remains the gold standard. Speed, transparency, and overreaction, in exactly that order. Put Tylenol and Peanut Corporation side by side, and you get the fundamental law of corporate crisis. The cover-up costs more than the crisis every single time. A fast, honest, expensive recall is survivable. Jack in the Box survived, Blue Bell survived, Chipotle survived. A delayed, minimized, or hidden problem is fatal, financially and sometimes criminally. Markets and juries both punish deception far harder than misfortune. If you ever run anything, a company, a team, a brand, burn this into your decision-making. When disaster strikes, the cheapest option available to you is the truth delivered fast. There's even an investor angle in the quiet data. Food safety performance is one of the cleanest windows into management quality you can find. Companies that invest ahead of regulations, publish their audit standards, and respond to small incidents with overkill. Think of how certain warehouse clubs and premium grocers have turned safety reputation into pricing power, tend to be well-run everywhere else too. The reverse also holds. Repeat recall offenders almost always turn out to have cut corners in accounting, labor, or logistics as well. Sloppiness is rarely departmental. A recall history is a free integrity audit published by the FDA. So let's distill the money lessons from all this bacteria and bankruptcy. Lesson 1. Trust is a balance sheet asset. Unwritten, unaudited, and usually your biggest one. Whatever business you're in, ask what your version of contamination is, the single event that converts customer trust into customer fear, and price prevention accordingly. Lesson 2. Beware efficiency that concentrates risk. The cheapest supply chain and the most fragile one are often the same chain. Redundancy looks like waste right up until the day it's the only thing keeping you alive. Lesson 3. Invisible investments are the ones that save you. Testing, insurance, maintenance, redundancy, the spending with no visible payoff in good times. Institutions and people who cut them are borrowing from a disaster fund they'll eventually have to repay with interest. Lesson 4. In a crisis, speed and honesty are financial strategies, not just moral ones. The Tylenol playbook beat the Just Ship It playbook by a margin measured in decades of survival versus prison. And Lesson 5. For investors, watch how management handles small problems. The company that hides a minor recall will hide a major one. Response quality is a leading indicator of everything else. As for the outbreak in this week's headlines, Watch it with your new toolkit. Watch whether the source gets officially confirmed and how fast. That's the traceability system being graded in real time. Watch how the companies involved communicate. Fast and full, or slow and lawyered. Watch the lawsuits, the supplier contracts, and whether an entire produce category takes collateral damage again. And spare a thought for the thousands of workers and farmers, almost all of them blameless, whose livelihoods swing on lab results they've never seen. That's the real cost of one invisible microbe. It never bills just one company. The food system that feeds 330 million Americans every day is, when you step back, a miracle of logistics, fresher, cheaper, and statistically safer than at any point in human history. But its very efficiency means that when it fails at industrial scale, and the bill arrives in emergency rooms, courtrooms, and stock tickers all at once. The companies that endure are the ones that understood, before the crisis, that in the food business you're never really selling food. You're selling trust with calories attached. Guard it like the billion-dollar asset it is. If this changed how you read a recall headline, or how you think about trust, risk, and the hidden machinery behind your dinner, then this channel is exactly where you belong. We break down the money stories hiding inside everything. The outbreaks, the empires, the collapses, and the lessons that protect your own wallet. Subscribe to Money Stories, ring the bell, and tell me in the comments, which brand do you think handled the crisis best, and which one lost you forever? See you in the next one.